Hello, I'm back from the Shadow Realm. You may have noticed a distinct lack of Disinherited devlog last week. Sorry about that, it is because a windstorm with 80-mile-per-hour winds ravaged our city and left us without power for 3 days and without Wi-Fi for 5. Luckily, we were able to stay with my brother and my sister-in-law for a couple nights, stay cool, and hang out with our adorable baby niece. I still brought over my laptop and got quite a bit of work done on the game. And it's a good thing too, since this video premiere date is day 98 of my 100-day challenge to finish Disinherited. I'm totally gonna do a full post-mortem video on the entire process and the challenge, but for today, let's talk about what really matters. Game progress. I'm Dryden Thomas, and like I said, this is day 98 of my 100-day challenge to finish Disinherited. It's a side-scrolling roguelike game where you throw, catch, and parry your way through Death's Domain to kill the Grim Reaper and claim eternal life, all despite your father, who wrote you out of his will. Let's start with the most recent addition, run data. It may sound a little bit boring, but it's an essential feature of any roguelike game. At the end, you get to see the length of your run, which items you collected, how many enemies you killed, how much damage you did, that sort of thing. I always find it super satisfying, and I want to give players that screenshot-worthy moment where you see everything that you did laid out in front of you. There's also going to be a sort of archive in the game where you can access all your data and review your runs. However, you've got to have quite a robust collection system for that sort of thing, and that's what I got started on most recently this week. Because this kind of script sources its data from so many different places in the code, it's easy for it to get into a real tangle. During a stream where I was working on a relic, Marusha Dark of Circuit Studios pointed me toward this event channel system. It basically can let scripts send information to each other without actually having to know anything about each other. So far it's working great. Another little feature I completed was this cursor. You might have spotted it in the last video, but it wasn't really complete yet. I added it because several playtesters were sort of losing track of where their cursor was, which made it difficult to aim quickly. Now that's something that's not a problem for me in the editor, because when you're editing in the engine, you can always see your cursor. I decided to make it a quill because Samuel's a poet and a writer, obviously. I can also imagine a world here where you get to unlock customizable cursors as you play, although I'd have to figure out how this works for controller. Next up, a rather major improvement. We have a stamina bar. I've only mentioned the stamina mechanic in passing in the devlog, but several playtesters pointed out that it was difficult to know when exactly your next roll was going to take you over the limit into exhaustion. I've been trying this sort of Celeste approach where the character color and these sweat particles tell you how close you are to running out of stamina. But there's a big difference in the overall game design, and this system needs to serve that. In Celeste, death is really cheap. You never go back more than a few seconds really, so if you misjudge your stamina and you fall, it's not a big deal. On the other hand, losing all your stamina in Disinherited hurts, and it's meant to. You have to wait for it to regenerate, and you can barely move while it does. That can lead to you taking damage can lead to you dying, which sends you back to the beginning of your run. Because the stakes are really high, my communication to you, the player, has to be a lot clearer. I don't love the traditional solution of adding a third bar over on the HUD though. For one thing, in the heat of combat or jumping around, your eyes really don't have time to dash over to the corner. It's also getting a little crowded over there, and what am I going to use to show stamina anyway? Lungs? I was talking to my brother about this when I was staying over, and he was like, sweat? And then it finally came together for me. I've always thought that the newest Zelda games really knocked it out of the park in terms of stamina meters. You don't have to look away from Link, it gets out of the way when it's not needed, and it's extremely clear. And my unique little spin on it is that mine is shaped like a sweat droplet. As you collect jade beads and add more stamina, more rings form around it. But they're smaller since tracking stamina only becomes important when you're running out of it. And there's a new way to use stamina too. My blessed playtesters have raised their voices in a glorious chorus and asked for the ability to jump off of the wall. It is now, finally, a reality. To keep this very agile mode of traversal balanced, it takes a little chunk of your stamina to do it, which also further increases the value of jade beads. Okay. Back to menu stuff. Playtester and channel member Pingu suggested that I create a menu that lets you tweak certain parameters in the game, and especially noted that this wouldn't be wasted work because then I could use it as an assist mode later. Even though making UI in Unity takes little pieces of your soul with it, I decided that I'd put it off far enough. I got some sliders in there to adjust your base max health, your oil burn rate, your damage reduction, the Reaper's speed, and the overall timescale. This uses the player pref system, so the settings you choose here will stay even if you leave the game. Implementing these variables throughout the code was shockingly quick. The difficult part, as always, is displaying the information well to the player. See, while the values being passed behind the scenes are just numbers, these little labels above the skulls are sneakily shown in 3 different ways. One as a flat number, one as a multiplier, and one as a percent. And this doesn't come for free. So I made this little static library of functions that spits them out, and the hardest part of this is just figuring out what to name them so that you won't be confused later. And to have a restore defaults button, you need to have a way of storing and tracking down those default values. I decided to hardcode them in with string constants, and created an enum so that they would be accessible in the inspector, and then I created basically a mask over the player pref system so I could have some neat little methods instead of typing the same lines of code referencing player prefs with different words over and over and over again. It was a lot of work, but what I got in the end was clear, tidy, and foolproof. Me-proof. I'm the fool. While I was at it, another nice, crucial feature to have is the ability to control the music and sound effects through sliders. This uses player prefs too, and it just sets values in my audio middleware Wise that drags up and down some faders. The design of the menus is unfinished right now, but you can tell kind of where I'm headed with this. I want to use a paper idea, maybe get some pen scratching sounds for when you move things around, and maybe even let you draw in the margins with your new cursor. Because UI stuff is so tricky to work with, it can often feel like when you finish something, it's kind of set in stone. I don't want to finish it just yet because I don't fully know what all the parameters are going to be. There's quite a bit more to talk about, but I want to take a break here to update you on the 10K YouTube subs minigame contest. Whilst at my brother's house, I got together with my Discord mods and my brother, and we talked about 100 out of the over 300 entries. And let me tell you, there are some real contenders. Cutting is hard, and that's all I'll say for now. The plan is to eventually have me make a video where I showcase kind of how I would implement the best ideas that I get, and then I'll open it up to a vote to all of you. Okay, let's return to the Change Monastery, shall we? I've come up with a couple new ways to handle environment art. First, we've got hanging decorations. These, just like the pillars from a few devlogs ago, are spawned in and then set themselves up. They shoot an invisible line called a raycast up to the ceiling and then move up to where they hit. I also made some physically responsive chains. These use the same sort of idea as the chains from Silas's boss room, but this time the chain line is drawn through a joined string of physics objects. They're a little bit expensive though, computationally, so I can't overuse them. Then I made this new kind of decor that I call end-to-end connected. These rotate a randomized amount before shooting a raycast up and down from their perspective, and then they stretch out to connect with whatever walls they hit. The last kind are the floor decorations. These took a little bit of extra doing, but it's worth it. They shoot a raycast down and then use information from the tile map to get the width of the floor that they hit in units. And then they can decide on appropriately sized decorations. These rugs here are the first example, but I think I'll be able to use this general idea to handle more complex decoration spawning later. Finally, I brought this all together into a new decoration pass during level generation. I call this floating decorations. During this pass, the code loops through all of the valid cells on the grid looking for empty ones. When it finds one, there's a chance it'll spawn some environment art. While this system needs some refinement, and I don't have nearly enough decorations drawn yet to truly add variety, I do think there's a lot of potential here. Last but not least, Silas has boss music. I think I'm gonna make a dedicated video about this, but it was one of the larger projects of the last 2 weeks with a lot of false starts and iteration. A sort of fun detail here as a teaser for the future music video is that as Silas gets closer to death, more layers come into the music, which lets it build to a climactic arc. I also added some more decorations to his boss room, but I think it could use a few chains. And as a final detail, I replaced Samuel's walk animation with one that's more of a run. The original animation was drawn on like day 2 of the competition when his movement speed was a lot slower, and now he looks like he's got some hustle. So you may be wondering, with just 2 days left, what's next? Well, my plan is to dedicate that time primarily to getting a lot of the missing sounds into the game. I do love sound design, and in fact it was the first game dev discipline I studied after music. But the fact is that during this process, the emphasis has been so strongly on game content, mechanics, and visuals that sound has really fallen by the wayside. Of course, 2 days is not enough to sound design 3 areas of a game, but I'm hoping that I can flesh out the soundscape just a little bit more during that time. Apart from that, my to-do list just keeps growing. Next week you can expect a devlog in our usual format, and then from there, you might see some change-ups. As always, a huge thank you to all of the generous channel members that are helping me along the way. A special thank you to the Reaper Council level members AJ Havoc and Red. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.